This is the review for the Chapter 4 Quiz 2. Your quiz tomorrow looks exactly like these questions. Same type of questions, just different questions. So if you take a look at the first type of question, what you need to do is you need to look at function A, which is a table, find the rate of change and the initial value from the table. All you're doing is finding that function rule. And then you need to look at function B, which is a graph, find the rate of change, find the initial value, and then you have 2 questions to answer. On your quiz tomorrow, your questions look exactly like this. You'll have 6 blanks that you have to fill out for this type of question. Go ahead and try this one on your own. I'm going to give you about 1 minute. Go ahead and try this one on your own, and then we will go over it.
Haven't we did this before?
Yep, we are reviewing for your quiz that you have tomorrow.
Oh, today's a review. Okay. We have a quiz every week.
Pretty much. You won't next week. All right, so let's look at function A and B. All right, let's look at function A first. All right, in function A, notice that your X column is going by ones. Remember that anytime that the X column goes by ones, you can just look for your rate of change as the pattern going down the Y column. So 0 to 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25. What are we doing each time? We are adding by 5. So your rate of change for function A would be 5. You could do subtract, divide to find your rate as well. If you did that, you would still get an answer of 5. We have 5 minus 0, 1 minus 0, 5 divided by 1 is 5. For your initial value, it's when X equals 0, whatever your Y value is. So when X equals 0, Y is 0. So your initial value is 0. In function B, what we're looking at is we are looking at the slope. Remember, your slope is your rate of change. When you write slope is always written as a fraction. How many up or down, and then how many over to the right. So to get from dot to dot to dot, from left to right, we're going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. So your rate of change is 2 over 1, or you could just say that it is 2. Your initial value is your y-intercept. It's where the line crosses the y-axis. The line crosses the y-axis right here at 0, 1. So your initial value is 1. Now we have some questions to answer. So which function has a lower rate of change? So we are looking and comparing 5 versus 2. 2 is lower than 5, so it would be function B. Which function has a higher initial value? So that means we're looking at 0 compared to 1. higher value, 1 is bigger than 0, so this would be B as well. Questions on this one? Go ahead and look at C and D, please. All right, compare C and D. Again, remember your rate of change is your slope. Your initial value is your y-intercept. Go ahead and try this one, please. Taking a look at function C, to get from dot to dot to dot, we are going down 1 over 2, down 1 over 2. Since we're going down 1 over 2, our rate of change is negative 1/2. Your initial value is where the line crosses the y-axis, as your y-intercept. Crosses it right there at 0, 3. So this would be a 3. When you're given an equation, your rate of change is just the number in front of your x. So your rate of change here is -2. Your initial value is whatever your plus or minus is. So that is going to be 4. Which function has a lower rate of change? So we're comparing a negative 1/2 and a -2. The more negative a number is, the farther away it is from 0 on the number line, the lower that number is. So -2 is smaller or lower than -0.5 or -1/2. So it's D. Which one has a lower initial value? You're looking at 3 versus 4. 3 is obviously lower than 4. So this would be C. So on your quiz tomorrow, your first 2 questions will look like these. You will have 6 different answers that you'll have to plug in for each of them, finding the rates of change, the initial values, and then answering the questions. Questions on these first 2? All right, the next type of question is like this. You're looking at a graph and you're looking at a table. They want to know, is the graph or is the table earning at a faster rate? Now, by faster rate, you are looking for the higher rate of change. So since you're looking for the higher rate of change, all right, you need to find the slope for this graph because that tells you your rate of change. And then for the table, you need to find the rate. Now, the rate, notice that our x column is not going by ones, our x column is going by fives. Therefore, you have to use subtract, subtract, divide to find your rate of change. Go ahead and do these 2, please. Figure out which one has a higher rate of change. when you take a look at your graph, be very careful. The slope of our graph is not 1. All right. The slope of the graph is not 1. Yes, technically we're going up 1 box and over 1 box, but the slope is not 1/1 because notice that every time that you go up 1 box, how much are you really going up? You're really going up 200 over 1, up 200 over 1. So our slope is really 200 over 1, or just 200. For your table, we have to do subtract, subtract, divide. Choose 2 numbers going up the y. So 3,500 minus 2,625. That gives you 875. Choose 2 numbers going up the x that are right next to it. 20 minus 15. 20 minus 15 is 5. And then divide your y answer, 875, divided by your x answer of 5. That gives you 175 as your rate. So we are really comparing a 200 and a 175. Which one is the higher rate of change? Well, 200 is bigger than 175. So your higher one is your graph in this case. Again, be very careful when you take a look at your graph. It's not up 1/1. It's really up 200 over 1 because it goes from 200 to 400. Take a look at the next one. Now, in this next one, this one's a little bit tricky. It's just a word problem. We're looking at which one makes baskets faster. So it says Bob and Jim are shooting baskets. Bob made 4 to start and is now making 3 per minute. Jim is making baskets according to the equation y equals 2x plus 8. Who is making baskets faster? Now, making baskets faster, again, we are looking for the higher rate. All right, who's making them at a higher rate now? So let's take a look at this one. It says Bob made 4 to start. Do I really care how many he made to start? No, I could care less how many he made to start. What I care about is that he's making 3 per minute right now. So his rate is 3. Jim has this equation. Now you have to remember, this is very, very important. You have to remember that your rate is the number that is in front of the x. This 8 is your initial value. That's what he started off with. Do I care how much he started off with? No, I could cross that right out. So Jim is really, his rate is really 2. So Bob has a rate of 3. Jim has a rate of 2. Who's making baskets faster or at a higher rate? Well, Bob's making 3. Bob is bigger because 3 is bigger than 2. You're going to have a question just like this. Again, remember your rate is the number that's in front of the x. Questions on this one? Take a look at the next one, please. This was just like the questions from yesterday. All right, go ahead and try and find your y values here. You want to take your 5 values and sub them in for x to find your y values or your f of x values. When you go to graph this, remember your x value is how many you go over. Your y value is how many you go up or down. Go ahead and try this one, please. Remember, anytime that you have this x squared, that is going to form a U-shaped graph. So we want to take these numbers in the green, our -2 to +2, and sub them in for x. Remember that if you are using a calculator to figure these out, if you go to type in -2 squared minus 4 into the calculator, you have to type it inside parentheses. If you don't type in the parentheses into your calculator before the squared, you're going to get it wrong. Now remember, there's two different ways to type in the squared. Some people have an x squared button. All right. Other people will have to do caret button 2 to do your squared. So -2 squared is really -2 times -2, which is +4. 4 minus 4 is 0. Remember, you put your answer in that y column. Then instead of x squared, we have -1 squared. Again, negative numbers have to go inside parentheses. So -1 squared is -1 times -1, which is +1. 1 minus 4 is -3. Then we have 0 squared. 0 times 0 is 0. Minus 4 is -4. We have 1 squared. 1 times 1 is 1. Minus 4 is -3. And then we have 2 squared. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. Remember that your first number and your last number should always be the same. Your second number and your fourth number should always be the same, because that's what's going to get your U-shaped graph. So when we go to graph it, remember, when we go to graph points, you always start right in the middle. So starting here in the middle, you're going over to -2, up to 0. So this is where our first point would be. Over to -1, down to -3, over 0, down to -4, over to 1, down to -3, and over to 2, up to 0. That forms that perfect U shape. So connect your dots, and it forms that U shape. Make sure that you put arrows on the ends of your lines. If you don't put arrows on the ends of your lines, you will lose credit on your quiz. Questions on this one? All right, go ahead and take a look at the next one. Now, the next one, again, you're going to take your x values and sub them in for x. Now, here you have absolute value. Remember, absolute value, you want to make whatever's inside those two up and down lines positive. You want to make whatever inside those two straight up and down lines positive. Anytime it's absolute value, it's going to form a V-shaped graph. Go ahead and try this one, please. So we're taking these x values and subbing them in for x. So you have the absolute value of -2, which is +2. 2 minus 2 is 0. The absolute value of -1. Absolute value of -1 is +1. 1 minus 2 is -1. The absolute value of 0 is 0, minus 2 is negative 2. Absolute value of 1 is 1, minus 2 is negative 1. Absolute value of 2 is 2, minus 2 is 0. Again, just like the previous question, to make that V-shaped graph, the first and the last numbers have to be the same. The second and the fourth numbers have to be the same. So starting in the middle, over to negative 2, up to 0. Over to negative 1, down to negative 1. Over 0, down to negative 2. Over to 1, down to negative 1, and over to 2, up to 0. Notice how this forms this perfect V-shape graph. Make sure that you put arrows on the ends. If you don't put arrows on the ends, you will lose points. Questions on this one? So you'll have one of those that has the x squared, which is a U-shaped graph. You'll have one of them that has an absolute value, which is a V-shaped graph. Take a look at the next part. In this next part, take a look at the top, please. All right. This is matching. You will also have a matching on your quiz. You want to match which graph, A, B, or C, matches the scenario above. Go ahead and try this one, please. So when you take a look at your answer or questions here, a person alternates between running and walking. So that means it's going to go up and then down, up and then down. The graph that goes up and then down is graph B. A person gradually speeds up to a constant running pace. A constant pace is not going to change. So that constant pace is right here in graph A, where it levels out. In the third one, a person walks, gradually speeds up to a run, and then slows back down. So walk, 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 run, 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 and then slows back down. So up and then down. So that would be choice C. You'll have a matching just like that on your quiz. The last part is I want to know which ones are linear, which means that they graph to be a straight line, and which ones are non-linear. Non-linear are going to be your U-shaped graphs and your V-shaped graphs. So go ahead and pick out which ones are linear and which ones are non-linear. These should be really, really easy. All right. Think back to the graphs that we just did. All right. When we take a look at this one, what made a U-shaped graph was that x squared. So you're looking for an equation that has an x squared in it. Ding, ding, ding. There's your x squared. That's going to form a U-shaped graph. A U-shaped graph is not a straight line. It is U-shaped. So that is non-linear. Take a look at the other one that we did. When it has an absolute value symbol, that's when it's going to be V-shaped. So take a look at here. We have an absolute value symbol. That's going to be a V-shaped graph. That is not a straight line. So this one is non-linear. Think back to earlier on in the chapter, or even the last chapter. This one would form a straight line. This one would be a straight line. And this one would be a straight line. It's easier to pick out the ones that are non-linear because the non-linear ones are going to have your absolute value and your x squared. Those are going to be your non-linear because that's your U-shape and your V-shape graphs. So that is what your quiz looks like.